I'm gonna be okay. I'm gonna be okay. I'll recover from this one. It's fine. Just let me lay here on the floor for a little bit. Cause it'll be okay. Hello, okay, no, we're going around again. Hello, interwebs, and welcome to my review of the latest episode of Star Trek Lower Decks. This one, the penultimate episode of the entire series. This one titled Fission Quest. And I'm going to let y'all know right freaking now, if you cannot tell by my reaction at the start of this video, holy fucking shit, holy fucking shit. Holy f***ing shit. This episode, everybody. Like, I'm sorry, I hurt the poor NX-01 baby while doing that. No, I'm sorry, stay, it's okay. Don't blow up your nacelle. Yes, I'm going to forewarn you all. Normally, I do a spoiler-free section. This is an episode that I think it is just absolutely best that you just go in absolutely knowing nothing. Like, if you have not seen the episode yet, just stop, go watch it now. All I will tell you is that this episode feels like it was tailor-made. Nope, won't say it. Y'all know who've seen the episode. Tailor-made for me specifically. Everything that I have ever wanted happens in this episode, and it makes me so happy. So with that said, if that didn't spoil enough for you, go watch the episode right now. We're getting into the review. Full spoilers in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Holy shit, everybody! They did canon Garshir. Garrick and Bashir are gay boys together. My little lizard man and his doctor husband are real, and I'm just so happy. And not only did they bring back Andrew Robinson and Sadig for their roles there, but in the same episode where they make Garrick and Bashir canonically gay. Not our own Garrick and Fissure. I know, we'll get to it in the comments. Like, just don't yell at me in the comments. But not only that, do they bring back Jolene Blaylock from Star Trek Enterprise to reprise her role as frickin' T'Pol. Me! Yes! I love it so much. You all, if you're new here, I'm sorry I'm getting overexcited, but like, if you all are new here, I have made no bones about the fact that I am a huge Star Trek Enterprise fan. I mean, I have the hat, I have the ship. Like, I am well aware that it is a show with many, many issues, many, many problems, and it is in many ways a very regressive Star Trek, especially for the era in which it was made. But it was also the Star Trek that I grew up watching week to week. Like, it was the first Star Trek show that I caught. So I have a certain level of nostalgia for it that means a lot to me, and Jolene Blaylock in specific, I think is just the absolute star of that show. I'm just gonna gush at you about Star Trek Enterprise. Screw it, who cares about the algorithm? This is gonna be a long one. Just strap in, everybody. Jolene Blaylock was a new actress. She was hired because she looked sexy, as many, sadly, women were in Star Trek throughout its history, but especially during that era. And not only was she just cast as eye candy by Rick Berman and such, she was actually a fantastic actress and brought so much depth to a character that, like 7 of 9 before her, could have just been eye candy, but she just did so wonderfully with it, even in episodes where they just make her like say stupid things like, I'm stinky.
You smiled when I said stinky. Good morning, stinky.
She just makes it feel so real, and is right up there with Leonard Nimoy and Mark Leonard and Tim Russ as like one of the best Vulcan actors of our time. But she was also a big Star Trek fan, and unfortunately, yes, she was treated really terribly behind the scenes of that show. You can look at interviews where she's talked about it from around that time. She's kind of stepped away from acting in recent years. She did a little bit of stuff. She was in like a Starship Troopers direct-to-DVD movie at one point. And so it was always sort of a long shot that, while a lot of us wanted her to come back as T'Pol, it was always a long shot whether she was ever going to. And so for her to come back in this show, that means the world to me. Not only that, and we will get to the actual episode proper, but I just have to talk about these things with you. Garrick and Bashir are in this episode. And yes, they are playing an alternate universe version of themselves, as I'll talk about in a little bit. We get a hologram EMH Dr. Bashir, which actually kind of references the episode from Deep Space Nine where Robert Ricardo guest starred, where he was coming back as Zimmerman to make an EMH Mark II. So there's a kind of reference to that there. And also this is a Garrick who became a doctor after presumably leaving the Obsidian Order. So it is like an alternate universe version of them, but they are made canonically gay here. And if you do not know why that is so important, in the very first scene that Andrew Robinson ever played as Garrick, he played the scene as he was attracted to Bashir, that he was like wanting to fuck Bashir basically.
I'm so glad to have made such an interesting new friend today.
And so many Trekkies picked up on it, and it became a huge thing within the fandom that Garrick and Bashir were gay. And it meant a lot to people, especially at that time, who were really wanting there to be canonical gay characters within the Star Trek franchise, especially considering the fact that Gene Roddenberry himself had promised that that would happen on The Next Generation, but he sadly passed away and the control of the franchise went to Rick Berman, who continually pushed against including gay representation in any form, even in tokenized appearances in the background on the show, with there literally having to be a letter-writing campaign to lead to the creation of the episode The Outcast, which was like the one big gay episode that they did, and it's kind of a messy episode in numerous ways. And, you know, you can watch the documentary What We Left Behind, the Deep Space Nine documentary that Ira Steven Behr, the showrunner of Deep Space Nine, made, along with other folks. And in that, they made very clear that they knew Garrick was gay, but not only did they not ever follow through on that, in fact, tried to put him with a bunch of women, sometimes in creepy ways, considering age difference stuff, with Zial in particular. It means you could read Garrick bisexual if you want. And I think both readings are valid. But they were never able to literalize it on the show, and part of the reason was Ira Steven Behr and the rest of the writing crew knew that he was gay and never bothered to ask Berman.
Garrick was clearly gay. I mean, everyone knew it. And we never played it. What we should have done, after The Wire in season 2, the episode where Bashir helps him get over his addiction, we should have had Garrick come out to Bashir as a gay Cardassian.
You think that the studio would have actually let you do that?
Maybe not. I don't know. Probably not, but we never asked. That's why we don't get the check.
And while I put some of the blame on them for that, for never bothering to ask, never even like actually trying to fight for something like that when they absolutely should have, it also speaks to the culture that was behind the scenes with someone like Rick Berman. In a series, in a franchise that's supposed to be about exploring strange new worlds, being inclusive, he created an environment that was in many ways homophobic, anti-gay, not allowing queer people to be literalized on screen, something that is hopefully rectified a little bit more in modern Star Trek with varying results that we can talk about in different ways, but they never did it. And so while both actors are aware of this interpretation, in fact, they did fan fiction readings over COVID where they played the characters as gay and have been super open about it. Even in the books, Andrew Robinson wrote a book where he made Garrick explicitly bisexual in his sort of backstory for Garrick in his books. Una McCormack in her Cardassia books that took place after Deep Space Nine made Garrick and Bashir canonically a couple in those books. Despite all of that, it was never on screen. And now we have at least a version of them that is canonically gay, and that means the world in a symbolic way. It means the world to just see these characters defined in that way. And I even spoke to Mike McMahon about this briefly recently. I literally texted Mike, because I do have his number, I try not to use it, but like I texted him like, you bastard, you finally did it. And I was just talking to him about it, and one of the things that he mentioned to me was that like he didn't want to do it with the actual characters from Deep Space Nine just because they're Ira Steven Behr's characters and the rest of the Deep Space Nine crew, and he didn't want to take them and do something so radical with them, but he did want to acknowledge this aspect of it. So for me, I think this is as close as we're going to get without having them on screen to do it like in live action. And I respect Mike's decision to do it that way, but I'm so glad he did it in some way, shape, or form. And it just means the world. And that is not all. Like I have been gushing about those two and Jolene Blaylock, but also we get Garrett back as Ensign Kim or Lieutenant Kim in this episode as well, which is also just fantastic. Like, man deserves his recognition, and he definitely gets it in a very fun way this episode. And then not only do we get all of this stuff, and I'll get into the actual review of the episode going forward in just a second, but like we get all of that. And we also get like a great critique on modern Hollywood storytelling through multiverse stuff in this episode, where you get a great human story that feels like it gets to the core ethos of what Star Trek is all about. And it's just a fun romp with a bunch of our characters and getting to do all of these like fun cameos and things. And like, look, I am someone to critique nostalgia, especially in live action Star Trek, but in this way, I think that this was the perfect amount to do it. It's not something I want my main Star Trek to be doing all the time, but in this one episode, in a penultimate episode of Lower Decks, I really loved it. I have some critiques of this episode, mainly things that aren't this episode's fault, but overall, like, I adore this episode so much. It probably will go down as one of my favorite episodes of Lower Decks, if not my favorite episode of Lower Decks, besides like Crisis Point 2 or Weege Dooge. Let's actually get into talking about the episode proper, because I've been going according to my clock here 10 minutes already, and I have not talked about the actual plot of this episode. So let's do that, but I had to gush all that at you. All right, I got my handy pad here to remind myself of some notes. But we start off the episode with our regular Lower Deckers hanging out in the bar, and Rutherford has like a laser eye now, which I'm just putting up to being a Chekhov's laser eye that we'll get to see pay off next episode. We also have Boimler having his full beard now. Hell yeah, my Boim. And we also get a wonderful moment where like, oh yeah, William Boimler died, but I mean like people come back all the time, and look at Shax and he's fine, and we just get Shax ranting. Loved that. But we also get reference to William Boimler, and we even get a oblique reference to the episode where he did supposedly die in Crisis Point 2, where our Boimler, our normal Boimler, sort of references the line that Dream Sulu said to him to help him come to terms with William's death.
The randomness of death is merely a reflection of the unexpected joys we find in life.
Now, William, if you don't remember, he was the transporter clone from the beginning of season 2 who stayed on the Titan, supposedly died, and then joined Section 31, as we later learned, or excuse me, an unnamed entity. It's Section 31. I have things to say about Section 31, but I will save that for the Section 31 movie coming next year. So we'll just take it as is in this episode, because I've already got going on too long. And we jump over to William Boimler's storyline. Now, here comes my one probably only major critique of the episode, and again, it's not the episode's fault, but this is the penultimate episode of Lower Decks. When they were making this episode, when they were making the season, they did not know it was the final season, but there is a little bit of sadness to me that not only did this episode not focus on our main crew members, despite it being the penultimate episode of the entire series, but neither did really last week's episode either. So the 2 of the 3 final episodes of Lower Decks are not focused on our main 4 Lower Decker characters that we've been following this entire time. Now, I'm sure the finale will mainly focus on them and give them like front and center, but there is a sadness to the fact that our characters don't get to take center stage for the large part of the final run-up to their series finale. Again, it's not this episode's fault. It's not the show's fault. It's not the creators' fault. It is Paramount's fault in particular. So I will blame them and put the blame just there, but there is that sort of in the air with this episode. What the hell was that? Did y'all hear that too? Am I about to be murdered? Anyways, we do jump over to William Boimler's ship. He is the captain of a Defiant-class ship, and he is on a mission to figure out what's going on with these fissures. Now, he presumes that there's someone just trying to destroy all the different universes, which I think is, a decent setup for what we're looking for in the penultimate episode of a season. I know a lot of people, myself included, have been frustrated with the fact that we did not get more development on this storyline, but it's finally coming to the fore here in this penultimate episode, and I love where it eventually goes. But yes, we get introduced to the entire crew. I've already discussed that ad nauseum. We get our crew of Ensign Kims. Love that. We get our Jolene Blaylock occurs on Dax before he transferred the symbiont to Jadzia. So love that. And I love that he's very Shax-like. He's just like, yeah, I want to fight everybody. We have never really got to see much of Curzon Dax within, Star Trek proper. He's in some ancillary stuff if you read some of the books or comics. And he's in one episode when he's played by Rene Aubergenois. But other than that, he doesn't directly appear. So it's cool to get a sense of his personality, even if it is an alternate universe version of him. And I really kind of enjoy where they go with this. The other thing we learned that I didn't mention before is we learned that T'Pol is from a universe where she got to spend her entire life with Trip Tucker, which, love that as well, considering, they kind of did T'Pol and Tucker dirty at the end of Star Trek Enterprise, where we got that look ahead and they still hadn't been together by everything that they had been through. So I do like that they got to spend an entire lifetime together in at least some universe. Already talked about Garrick and Bashir. Love that dynamic. But we also have Boimler upset about the journey that he's on. He doesn't like dealing with multiverses. Like, yes, he's trying to save the universe, but he's really upset that, as he says, the multiverse is just a bunch of lazy remixes, like a human war for a big Spock, which I love, because not only is that like just a good setup for his character for the episode, but it is a critique on how Hollywood has been using remixes. I mean, I've been using multiverses, I should say. Outside of a few specific instances, such as like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, for the most part, multiverses in big movies, in particular the MCU, have been just ways to do a remix on a character and bring back something from the past that people liked, whether it be, you know, Patrick Stewart as Professor X in live action in the Doctor Strange movie, or, you know, the DC Comics crossover multiverse stuff where it was like, oh, look, we can bring back Brandon Routh as Superman. Like, to varying levels of degree of success, some of those things I actually did enjoy. I like Brandon Routh as Superman back in the Arrowverse shows, and MCU stuff I generally have disliked for the most part. But, like, it is just nostalgia. It's just a vehicle for nostalgia. And there's so many more ways you can use the multiverse. Like, there's many great stories that you can do with multiverses. There's well, I won't say that'll be a spoiler, but there's a show made by even J.J. Abrams that did multiverses very well. I don't want to name because it's a spoiler which one. But yeah, there's, like, good ways to use multiverses, and we haven't really been. Outside of, like, again, your Spider-Man's Into the Spider-Verse. And even that uses... to some degree, uses multiverses for nostalgia's sake as well. And so it's just kind of lazy. It kind of speaks to our nostalgia culture, and I like Boimler kind of having a meta-style critique on that trope within this episode. That being said, I will be self-critical and say, like, they are being critical of that trope, but they are also doing the trope. Because again, they brought back T'Pol, they brought back Eric and Fissure. It is a lot of nostalgia remixes, and I do enjoy them. So I will say, like, the show is critiquing a thing that they are still doing. It's kind of like putting a lampshade on it. I will say I like this in particular because, again, it's not a live action main show. Like, if this was done on, like, Strange New Worlds or something, I would be like, I'm not here for it. It's kind of why I didn't like a Star Trek Picard season 3 to some degree. There are other issues I have with that season, but that's one of them because it just redid Next Generation at the end in the final 2 episodes. But this is an animated like show that is not like the centerpiece of the franchise. So I think it's fine, more fine to do it here than, you know, like on Strange New Worlds or something like that, or Discovery or whatever. And also on top of that, the remixes that they do here that they focus on are trying to do something that is commentating and trying to do well by the past, such as Doing Well by Jolene Blalock, doing well by Ensign Kim never getting to be an ensign, as like we get to see our Ensign Kim who gets picked up here has Lieutenant Pips, and having a commentary on that, and Garrick and Bashir getting to be explicitly gay together. So like there's some level of at least commentary being had with these remixes in this episode that I think is at least a step above beyond just like, hey, look, it's the thing that you like that's now here. But still, it is doing the thing. So, like, I'll be self-aware to a degree on that front. And I love all of these different characters' relationships we get here. We get T'Pol and Curzon having like an argumentative relationship that I think works really well. And the show does a really good job, despite only having a few scenes with these characters, really in setting up their dynamics, really at making it feel emotional. Like the whole arc with T'Pol and Curzon growing and like showing that like they're argumentative, but actually being friends in the end of the episode, I thought was actually very sweet and wonderful. And like, again, this episode feels like it was tailor fucking made for me because you have T'Pol, my girl T'Pol, my Star Trek Enterprise T'Pol, taking on the memories of Dax by mind melding and like backing up Dax as Curzon gets killed in a fight because that's such a Curzon thing to have done, a very Shax thing to have done as well. And so I love that, but it's like, you're gonna take Dax, my Dax, the Dax that like, the character of Dax, Jessie Dax in particular, was like how I learned I was trans. And you're gonna have T'Pol, this character that means so much to me too, on another way, take on the memories of Dax. I'm like, this feels like it was just like my fan fiction being made manifest. And I love it. I love it so much. I loved all of the Harry Kim jokes, like we get the one lieutenant who gets to be angrier. I'll talk about more of that in a minute, but like the Ensign Kim's just sort of being like having bets about whether their Voyager made it to the Delta Quadrant. The fact that they're all ensigns except for one, so like most Ensign Kims don't get promoted, which is just going back to the joke that poor Kim stayed an ensign the entire 7 years of Voyager, while hell, even Tom Paris got promoted, demoted, and promoted again during that time. And then them also asking about like, oh, what did you do with your Tuvix? I love that little offhanded line as well. And then also Garrick and Bashir's storyline, I also really like we finally get to be explicitly gay, and we have to spend an entire episode watching them argue. It hurts my heart. But them arguing about which universe they want to end up in. I love the little differentiations that we get between this Garrick and Bashir. Like, it still feels core to them as characters. Like, Garrick just arguing with Bashir just for the sake of arguing. That, as we learned at the end of the episode, that feels very Garrick. So, like, while they're in different situations, they still feel like they're characters, which I liked that. It was hard needle to thread, but also like their differences matter as well. Garrick getting to be a doctor was super cool. Getting to see an EMH version of Bashir, like jumping around and like making mentions of like holograms don't get much from massage, I thought was also really wonderful. So like their back and forth was just really sweet and wonderful, and I loved just seeing how clearly Garrick was just fucking with Bashir and having fun with it. I love that dynamic. But even more so, them getting to kiss at one point in the episode. And also there's a scene where like everything's in rainbows. We'll talk about it more in a second. But like Garrick and Bashir are gonna have a scene while rainbow lights going on. Love it. Adore it. Just gay as fuck, and we're here for it. But them also getting to have a kiss on screen. Love it. And not shying away from like, yeah, they're husbands, but like they'll just hold hands. Like, no, they get full on kissing. So just that is very much appreciated. Loved that whole storyline. But focusing in on like the main storyline here, we do have Mariner, an engineer version of Mariner from across the multiverse, arriving with Boimler, and Boimler expressing his frustration with the situation about the remixes and all that, but him like having connection with this Mariner even beyond universe. And I like that this Mariner also as well is a Mariner that doesn't take risks as much. Like, she is different but still feels true to her, and like she's a different type of character, but yet she and Boimler have a connection across universes. And I love that. And it also reminds me that this version of Boimler, he only got to know them through like one season of the show. Like, he left the Cerritos at the end of season 2. So like, loved that arc there. But then they learn from Mariner that she has a way to figure out how to find the ship that is crossing multiverses, which is like it creates 2 different fissures because energy needs to be conserved across universes. And so it opens up a second one. They've been going to the wrong one. I will say I did watch this episode with Dr. Aaron McDonald, who is a close friend of mine, who is also the science advisor on Star Trek. And every single time science stuff came up, she would point at the screen and was like, that was me. And I'm like, yeah, of course. And she was, I'll probably interview her at some point, but she's talked about like how the bubble bath analogy was like her idea and things like that. So loved that, adore her, love her science-y, Y&C nonsense. And she assures me it makes total sense. So I'll trust her on that. She is the astrophysicist, not me. But they do manage to open up a fissure, cause the ship to come through. Here's where another critique I have of the episode is Boimler just starts attacking their ship. We do learn later that there's a reason why they don't try to reach out and hail them, because they do have a version of a prime directive across universes on that ship. So they might not have responded anyways, but it did bug me a little bit that Boimler, even though he was frustrated, did just start shooting at them, because it didn't feel very Federation-like. Like, again, you could argue it's part of his character that he's frustrated, he's kind of done with it, he wants things to be done. I can buy that to a degree, but it does make me a bit more critical of this Boimler overall. But regardless, he does shoot them down, and they land on a planet, the same planet with the bog aliens that we met in the Prime universe a few seasons ago. But they are much more violent here. They lock them up, and we learn who the people are behind this ship, and it is led by none other than Lily Sloan, played by Alfie Woodard, the character from Star Trek First Contact. And I love that, number one, they brought the actress back, but number two, bringing this character back because, you know, she was great in that movie and played off Picard really well. But there is something to be said about the fact that, you know, you have Lily and Zefram Cochrane supposedly having made the warp drive together, and yet the history in Star Trek itself within the Star Trek universe only seems to remember Zefram Cochrane. And so there is an element of like, this black woman has gotten overlooked by history within the Star Trek universe. And so again, this is another callback, a nostalgic callback, but one in a way that is kind of centering lower Dexian style characters that have been marginalized within the Star Trek franchise itself. And it feels very lower decks in ethos, and it feels really wonderful to celebrate Lily as well as the actress Alfie, to center her and have her be celebrated. And also get a couple moments with Mariner as well, 2 black women getting to you know, have that conversation on screen across the Star Trek franchise. Like, what I really love is, I know Tawny Newsome, she is someone who is a very big advocate for just people generally, but also just, you know, speaking about her experiences as a black woman, both in the industry and just generally. She has the podcast, Is This Racist? And it has been really wonderful to see that not only Tawny, but Mariner, the character, have had many chances to sort of connect Black women across the franchise. There was a wonderful video, if you haven't watched it, where Tawny and Sonequa Martin Green, the lead actress on Star Trek Discovery, got to interview each other over on the Star Trek's main channel. It was a really wonderful conversation that they had. And then not only that, Tawny guest starred on the episode of Strange New Worlds with the Lower Decks crossover, and she had a wonderful scene with Uhura, as well as the actress who played Uhura, Celia Rose Gooding. I should say the actor who played Uhura, because Celia is non-binary. I just really, knowing how much Star Trek means to Tawny, and also how much of an advocate she is, it is really cool to just having her character and her having had so many scenes with Black women across the franchise, both past, present, and future. And I think that's really cool. And that continues here with this sequence. So loved that.
We also got a sequence where Garrick rescues everyone by hitting them in the back using his supposedly obsidian order training. I loved that while this Garrick is not a tailor, he does have a similar moment where he tells Bashir, I am a doctor, but not just. And I think that was a perfect reference to a Garrick-style trope. I am just a plain and simple tailor.
But what I loved as well was Boimler getting angry, saying like, oh, you must be evil, and it turns out they're not evil. Like, the bad guys of this season turn out to not be bad guys. They're just a different type of federation, as Boimler says. Like, that feels very Star Trek. Like, the villains aren't really villains. Like, love that. Again, Lower Decks just capturing the ethos of Star Trek. But even more in that ethos, like, Boimler's still frustrated, and he says, like, I don't believe what you're doing is exploring. But Lily explaining, like, I like to explore other universes, not just Strange New Worlds, because I'm mapping human potential. Every universe reveals a different element of what humanity can achieve, and we have a limitless potential. And frankly, that is what Star Trek is always about, as a franchise, right? Like, yes, explicitly, they are seeking out Strange New Worlds and to explore new civilizations and to learn more about the other. But the whole point of exploring is to learn more about ourselves. How do we react when we learn new things? How do we grow when we learn new things? How do we change when we engage with different species and diversity? And what Star Trek as a franchise, as a fictional vehicle is a story also about trying to break down those barriers, about exploring what it means to be human through metaphor, through seeing the alien other as ourselves, and not saying them as other. Star Trek has not always lived up to that. Sometimes it's used the aliens to otherize other people. But at its core, the ethos of Star Trek has always been that we are not exploring Strange New Worlds, we're exploring ourselves through exploring Strange New Worlds. There's a wonderful speech at the end of Star Trek Enterprise. Much criticism I have of that show, but my favorite speech in that show is the penultimate episode where Captain Archer talks about, I'll just have him say it here, I'll play the clip.
That no matter how far we travel, or how fast we get there, the most profound discoveries are not necessarily beyond that next star. They're within us, woven into the threads that bind us, all of us, to each other.
And that to me is the epitome of Star Trek to me. And I think that this captures that so well, relating this to Boimler's connection with Mariner, because that's what she is seeing here. She's saying, like, part of what's unique about you as a human right now is that across universes you have a connection to Mariner. That's what's beautiful. You have connections that cross the stars, cross universes. That's what, again, Star Trek is all about, connection with others and connecting to our own hearts. So loved that ethos here. Just love this show. I'm gonna miss Lower Decks so much, because as much as it is like, oh, here's all the cool Star Trek references, it just captures what I love about Star Trek in its heart in ways that I don't even think other Star Trek shows sometimes even miss. And this one just wears it on its sleeve. So I just love this show. I love this show so fucking much. Yeah, but then we get to the bit where they are escaping, but Lieutenant Kim steals the ship. Here's a critique I have. While it is very funny that there's this kind of, again, meta narrative on the fact that, like, Kim never got promoted, and that is a critique on the show. Not only just a critique on the show never doing that, but it also could be said, like, hey, the Asian dude never got promoted. What the fuck is up with that? But allowing him to like kind of play villain about that and be like, hey, Kims need to be respected. Loved that as a bit. And as a commentary, there's a logistical thing for me where I'm like, I feel like the other Ensign Kims, who seem like just good lads, would not have let it get as far as it did, even if they were tricked by Lieutenant Kim. So like that was stretching believability a little bit for me. I'll give it to it because it's a cartoon show, but like it didn't, I was thrown a little bit out in the episode being like, this is stretching it a bit that they would be going along with this for so long. But it's a fun little action sequence that we get there. One thing I forgot to mention too, I kind of touched upon it, but there's a sequence earlier in the episode when they're crossing universes, and it's that rainbow light. I thought that was a gorgeous animated sequence. Like Star Trek is always gorgeous. Our Lower Decks is always gorgeous. But like that sequence in particular, and I also want to shout out Chris Westlake's music at that point too. Like again, Chris Westlake, who is the composer for Star Trek Lower Decks, is always fantastic. Captures the Star Trek essence to a T. But that moment where they were going across and get that like brah noise, very Christopher Nolan. But it was just had this like creepy epicness to it that I loved. You don't always capture that feeling of epicness in a cartoon show soundtrack, and Chris Westlake just really does it so consistently well, and I just felt it there, so I just wanted to call him out at that point too. So that was a really great sequence. The action sequence here was really great, but it ends out the episode where our Lieutenant Kim gets killed for his efforts, and it causes a potential cascade that can destroy all the universes, and Boimler chooses to send it back to our main universe, the Prime Timeline, because he trusts his friends across the universe, which is very sweet and heartwarming. Also, what the hell, man? I love him being like, as long as my Boimler doesn't freak out, he'll get the message. Kind of reminded me very much of episode Timeless, I believe it's called, the 100th anniversary episode of Star Trek Voyager, where Kim was in the future and sent a message to his past self. So it felt very like that, but I also love Boimler at the end of the episode freaking out as we get the to be continued sign. Like that was just hysterical. Like I said, I ranted already a lot about this episode. I'm sure there's more that I'm forgetting, but like on every level, this episode just was tailor-made for me and captured so many of the things that I love about Star Trek, this era of Star Trek. Like, just to run it down just for you real quick here, like, in this episode, we got characters from my particular nostalgia, T'Pol. We got Garak and Bashir, two characters I love from one of my favorite, like my favorite Star Trek show, Deep Space Nine. Lower Decks and Deep Space Nine duke it out between themselves as my favorite, but I think I lean towards Deep Space Nine generally. But they're both fantastic. But like them in this episode, getting to be canonically gay, fixing a critique from that. We get to see Kim getting a critique, Ensign Kim back as well from Voyager, getting to like express his critique of the franchise in a fun way. We get to have T'Pol mind meld with Dax, which is again just a weird connection for me, particularly as like a trans person who love Dax and also love T'Pol. So like that was a weird connection for me. There's all that nostalgia stuff, but then on top of that, this episode didn't just do nostalgia stuff, but use that nostalgia to critique the franchise, to fix problems with the franchise in a way that is not cruel, not mean, not going, hey, you did these naughty things, Star Trek, how dare you, but in a way that says, hey, let's do it better now. Let's grow. Let's do it again and let's do it better. And that is a Star Trek ethos of like, keep trying and just make it better. I love that in its critiques. And then on top of that, it had this message of like centering marginalized people who are put off the side, like Lily throughout Star Trek. And then on top of that, this episode just had a message about exploring human potential and mapping human potential and exploring to learn what it means to be human and the connections that we make as humans, which is a Star Trek ethos. And it did it in a way that's just funny and gorgeous and hilarious and just beautiful, and frankly, like outside of my critique of like, I wish our main Lower Decker characters got to be centralized in the penultimate episode of the series. Outside of that, which again is not this episode's fault, like I think that this episode in so many ways captured what is unique, what is special, what is wonderful about Lower Decks, and I just loved it. And it just this being the penultimate episode of the show, I just have to say like it makes me all the sadder that this journey is coming to the end. And I'll talk more about this next week when we get to the end, and hopefully there's more Lower Decks in some form going forward. I mean, like, it's Star Trek, people always come back from the dead, as this episode is very clear about saying. But at the end of the day, I am just so glad for this show. I am glad for what it's done. I'm glad for what it's said. I'm glad for what it's given us. And it is a very meaningful show to me in many, many ways. And this episode just captures so much of it, and I adore it. So, yeah, I have ranted enough for all 2 of you who have stuck with me throughout this entire review, thank you. I do it because I love it, not because it pays my bills. But if you want to help me on Patreon, that does help as well, because we are moving soon. But beyond all of that, I will just say, like, thank you to all of you for watching. For those of you who are from Lower Decks who are watching this review, love you as well. Thank you for this. And I'll see you next week for the series finale. That said, live long and prosper, everybody.